altijd verteld aan de hand van een paar vragen. Namelijk wie, wat, waar, wanneer en waarom. Maar de belangrijkste vraag is whisky. En vandaag hebben wij bij ons van de NC'nean Distillery Annabel, Queen of the Spirits. Wij hebben een heerlijke NC'nean vandaag. Dus ik mag de whisky inschenken, want Max is er even niet. En we gaan het hebben over wat Annabel nou precies gedreven heeft om deze distilleerderij te starten. Wat haar missie was daarmee. We gaan het hebben over recyclen, waar ik heel erg veel van hou. We gaan het hebben over alles eigenlijk. We gaan het hebben over water, over gist, over graan, over whisky, over alles. Het hele proces van voor tot achter. Maar dan met een minuscule carbon footprint. Dus pak lekker de whisky erbij, schenk hem in. Ik heb er heel veel zin in. Leuk dat je luistert naar batch 9 van onze podcast alweer. We hebben iets speciaals wat er aan zit te komen. Want binnenkort gaan we van start met de 10e batch. En dat moet natuurlijk gevierd worden. Hey! Dus voor al jouw whisky-liefhebbende vrienden en vriendinnen. Nou ja, voor jou vooral. Want jij kunt hen uitnodigen om zich ook te abonneren op onze podcast. Elke 6 weken 6 buisjes. Doe je dat nou en vermelden ze jouw naam bij het kopje aanbevolen door, dan kun jij daarmee per persoon die zich aanmeldt €10 terugkrijgen. Dit geldt alleen voor de 10e batch. Dus hurry. Meld snel al je vrienden en vriendinnen aan. Zorg dat iedereen zich welkom voelt hier bij onze podcast. Zorg dat iedereen kan meegenieten van deze heerlijke whiskies. Maar voor die van vandaag van NC'nean zijn ze helaas al te laat. We gaan er nu lekker samen van genieten met Annabel. Welcome, Annabel.
Thank you. So nice to be here with you.
It is so good to have you here. So good to see you. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. Yeah. I've been busy, but I'm good.
I can imagine in these times.
In these times, exactly.
So you have founded NC'nean Distillery. Is that correct? Because you had a mission. You're a woman on a mission.
I am. Well, I'm a woman on a long mission because I've been working on it since 2013. So I used to be a strategy consultant, nothing to do with making whiskey. And I decided in 2013 to leave that job to found NC'nean on my family's farm with a mission to make Scotch as sustainably as possible, keeping in mind everything to do with the planet as we go, but also making a completely delicious whiskey at the same time and having some fun with the flavours along the way.
Very well. And what whiskey is it that we are having today?
This is our core expression, as it were. So this is our normal whiskey. We release it in batches. I have a feeling you have Batch.5.
Yes, we do.
I don't have Batch.5, but they are not significantly different between them, or they shouldn't be if our blender is doing his job right. So this is our sort of perfect expression of NC'nean. It's 100% organic. It's light and fruity and a bit spicy.
It smells very nice.
Loved it.
Can you guide us through it, Annabel?
I can. So this is about 3 to 4 years old. Each batch is a slightly different age. It is matured in a mixture of STR red wine and ex-bourbon barrel. STR stands for shaved, toasted and recharred. So we take Spanish red wine barrels, we shave the inside off, we toast them and we rechar them, and that makes very active barrels, and they bring a lot of the spice notes that you get.
It's a very modern process, is it? It's quite new.
It is, yeah. It is new. It was actually so-called invented by Dr. Jim Swan, who was our master distiller. Until he sadly passed away in 2017. So that is part of the reason that we use STR barrels. So in here you will find about 2/3 STR and about 1/3 bourbon. The underlying spirit is still very evident because it's quite young. So the fruitiness, the cleanness, that all comes from the underlying spirit. The bourbon adds some nice sweetness and vanilla notes. And one thing that a lot of people remark on is that it tastes lovely and kind of oily and rich on the palate. And part of that comes from the fact it is organic. malted barley that we use.
Tell me about it.
Well, as I said at the beginning, part of our mission is to create whiskey as sustainably as possible. And whilst there's lots of stuff we do at the distillery to achieve that, I also really wanted to make sure that all of the farmers that we buy barley off, and that is, of course, the main ingredient for making whiskey, we applied the same principles to the farming end as we did to the distilling end. So we decided to purchase organic barley because of the biodiversity benefits and other benefits it has on the farms where it's grown. But what we didn't necessarily expect, partly because Jim Swan, who I just mentioned, said organic barley would be an expensive waste of time, we didn't expect it to have any impact on the taste. But I think kind of the low yields in the fields in which the barley is grown create a kind of density of flavour in the barley, and that translates through into the spirit.
All right.
Which bonus we were not expecting.
That's lovely. I'm going to have a try. It smells wonderful. It smells kind of like my mom's herb garden, like rosemary and thyme and all that. I really like it. Annabel Slunch. So good. That is really good. It's kind of, I like the spiciness. I often find whiskey a bit peppery. I think that's the alcohol probably. But I like that it has, more of an, it's not really pepper. It's more of a nutmeg maybe, or chili or something.
I definitely get the nutmeg.
And it has a very soft finish.
It does. That is all down to the way we make the spirit in the distillery in the first place, really.
Yeah. So you told me a bit about the grains that you use. I read that you buy them from farmers on the East Coast. Is that correct?
Exactly. We're on the West Coast.
Yeah, but the climate...
There is not much... Yeah, it's not very conducive to barley farming on the West Coast. It's quite wet. So almost all of the barley that's grown in Scotland is grown on the East. So we buy it from there. We used to source from about 10 different barley farmers across Scotland, and that's what will be in what we're drinking. But we're actually transitioning just now to source from 2 or maybe 3 farmers and distill them individually. So over time, we will see what difference it makes, which I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, that's very exciting. So you told us a bit about how you got started on the distillery back in, what did you say, 2013? You started the idea, and in 2017, it actually started distilling. But what about you? What gave you the inspiration to do this? What motivates you as a person, as a whiskey maker?
Well,
as a woman
the original
in the whiskey world.
In whiskey, exactly. Yeah. Well, as the original inspiration, it was a family idea. It's on my family's farm. It's on the west coast of Scotland. It's very evocative of whiskey, and I think that's what happens in Scotland. Right? There's lots of distilleries around. We look at Tobermory. This is the distillery there, and we sort of had this dream, I think is what it could be described as, of creating a distillery. And then I took some time off work in 2012 and offered to my family, well, I will do some research, I'll write a business plan. And as part of that process, I went to Islay to do some research. At the time, Kilhoman was really the only new small distillery around, so I wanted to go and see them, but obviously there's lots of other distilleries as well. And as I was going around, I really felt like there was a lot of focus on tradition, which is of course the bedrock of the industry, but there weren't enough distilleries talking about what I cared about, things like sustainability. And I just thought, I have to do this. This is what I need to do. I need to create a distillery in Scotland that is maybe just a bit more forward looking. So we're focused on sustainability and some more experimental liquids. And yeah, that was where it all started.
All right. So you did some of your research about founding a distillery on Islay. What is your view on peated whiskies? Is there an influence of that idea in the spiciness of the NC'nean spirit, or? No,
there's not actually at all. And in fact, personally, I'm not a big fan of peated whiskies. Part of what I want to do with a more kind of forward-looking or modern approach is bring people to whiskey that maybe don't drink it already. And I think peat can be
a bit frightening.
Exactly. Well put.
It's something I've heard before.
Exactly. So for that reason, I didn't want to use peat, but also it is obviously not very sustainable to dig up peat and burn it. So even if we had wanted it from a taste point of view, I think we would have rejected it from a sustainability point of view.
Sustainability is very big for NC'nean. I read that 99.97% of all your resources are recycled. Is that right? And then
that is correct.
This gorgeous glass bottle behind me is made up out of 100% of recycled materials. That
is right.
That's clear glass. How do you do that?
I know. Well, luckily we don't have to do it ourselves because that is not my area of expertise. But we were lucky enough in late 2019, just before we were thinking about launching the whiskey in 2020, we met this amazing company who had been working on the project to create these bottles for 5 years. And yeah, they use 100% post-consumer recycled glass. The amazing thing about it is not completely clear. So if you put it next to a normal premium spirits bottle, it looks either green or blue. And over time, that changes. Some of the batches are greener, some of them are bluer. It just depends what
because everything has been
impurities,
recycled.
Stuff gets in. It's not perfect. So they called us up of the second lot of bottles they sent and said, I'm really sorry, they're not quite the same bottle colour as the first. And we were like, we don't care. Part of the, joy of it.
Yeah.
And exactly. And they also have, if you look at them carefully, you can't really see because after we've put the pattern over it, it's less clear, but there are quite a lot of bubbles in them compared to a normal bottle. If there was a single bubble in a normal premium glass bottle, it would get rejected and thrown back into the furnace. But basically for ours, unless there is a really obvious ugly bubble, which doesn't happen very often, then they carry on through, and that also helps save energy and raw materials and everything. So very cool process.
That is great. And speaking of this bottle, I mean, they are gorgeous. What's the inspiration behind this wonderful floral design? I very distinctively remember seeing NC'nean in a liquor store for the first time because it's just, I mean, look at this. I saw it and I wanted it. It's gorgeous. Where does this come from? Is this what the area looks like around the distillery?
Yeah, so every plant that you see on there grows around the distillery. And very early on, way before we released the whiskey, actually, we had an illustrator not come to the distillery, she didn't do it at the distillery, but draw a lot of the plants that grow around the distillery. So you've got heather, there's gorse, there's ferns. On the back, there's a bit of barley to represent what goes into the product. And yeah, we thought it was pretty. That's the main reason we did it. But we also just wanted to use it to represent our kind of commitment to the environment, I suppose.
And your first few products were also inspired by the environment, right? By nature.
They were. And the botanical spirit much more so than the whiskey, I guess, because the botanical spirit is a bit like a gin, but it is based on our unaged whiskey. So someone made a comment to me that our unaged whiskey was so delicious, we should bottle it like it was. I thought that was a bit niche, but I had been out with a forager around the distillery around the same time, and all these amazing things that grow and taste delicious. So we thought, well, what if we combine those two things? Let's try redistilling our new make with botanicals like you would make a gin and see what happens. And what we ended up with, we're not allowed to call a gin because it never, part of EU legislation, it never gets to a very high alcohol percentage, but it kind of tastes not dissimilar to a gin, but with this lovely malty flavour underneath that comes from the whiskey.
Wonderful.
So we hand forage a lot of the botanicals that go into the botanical spirit.
That must be very time consuming.
It is.
That is hard work. I mean, how many people work at your distillery? Quite a few, I'd imagine.
At the moment, we have a team of 15.
15?
15. Not all of those are at the distillery. So I think there's 6 of us that aren't based at the distillery full time. And so the other 9 are at the distillery. Not all of them go foraging, but it is a time consuming summer occupation. And we try to pull in anyone else around who's willing to help us with it at the time.
Okay. I was thinking more along the lines of like 150. But
no.
Very small base then.
Very small, yeah.
And those other people, do they volunteer or are they kids and spouses who
paid.
are put on a job in their summer
They are
holidays?
quite often kids and spouses and anyone else who's around, but they're definitely paid for the privilege. I don't think you could persuade anyone to go foraging for bog myrtle unless they were being paid.
I mean, it sounds like a good tourist trap.
It's true.
I've heard about this really good one for malting floors. Where they get tourists to shovel the grain. So that would be a very good. Hey, so NC'nean is quite an unusual name. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes. Well, it is based on a much longer word, NC'nean, who is an ancient Gallic goddess. And we found her story and just thought she so perfectly represented what we stood for that we would borrow her name for the whiskey and the whole distillery. So she was known as a protector of nature. So she lived in the forests, she lived with the animals, but she was also known for walking her own path. And that kind of perfectly sums up what we're trying to do. But NC'nean as a word is about 13 letters. It's very hard to spell. So we condensed it down into a slightly simpler, although still slightly difficult word for the actual distillery.
And as I understand it, she was also known as Queen of Spirits. Is that right?
Exactly. And when we found that
is...
out, I mean, who else could we choose?
Exactly. But now that is a nickname, I understand, that you get called as well. That's a very big compliment, Your Majesty.
It is. Why, thank you. Not one that I have given myself, I hasten to add.
No, I can understand that. But I think it's wonderful that, you know, the people around you have decided or have seen that you are on such a great mission and have decided to name you that. I think that's lovely.
Exactly. I take it as a compliment.
So there's another thing that you and I think the other people at NC'neans are also named, which is the Quiet Rebels. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
How so?
Well, that is a name we have more given ourselves, although it still is related to NC'nean kind of philosophy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we like to just quietly do our own thing, I suppose. We're not loud and brash about it, but we don't necessarily believe in following all the so-called rules that have been set out by Whisky. And I guess one of those, as you alluded to earlier, is the whole women don't make whiskey, women don't drink whiskey, blah, 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 blah.
We're here to prove the opposite.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's a good example.
Mm-hmm. So are there many women aboard at NC'neans? Or is it equally divided, men and women?
We have slightly more women than men.
That's a win.
So, exactly. Not necessarily intentional, but I think I benefit as the CEO of attracting more women. And yeah, it's a cool place to be.
And you also dedicated a spirit to you and those around you, the Quiet Rebels expression. Is that right?
We did indeed. And actually, it is not just one. So every autumn, we release one of our seasonal releases. And that series is called The Quiet Rebels. And every year, it is named after one of our team. And they get to choose the whiskey that goes into the bottle.
Oh, that is lovely.
So
they get to pick and choose from all of the casks that you have, or is there a pre-made blend that a bunch of
No.
They
So
get to pick and choose everything.
Exactly. Well, we've only had one, and I was privileged enough to be the first picker and chooser. So Matt and I went up to the distillery together, and we had some Tokai casks in the warehouse, which had my eye on for quite a long time. So we created a blend around that, basically.
And what are Tokai? Tokai? Am I saying
Tokai?
Tokai.
Hungarian sweet wine.
That sounds lovely.
So delicious.
So can you tell us more about the recipe?
Yeah, well, it was absolutely. Although you're taxing my memory a little bit because it was last that we did it. So there was Tokai casks and a lot of bourbon, which I love. I love that kind of vanilla-y sweetness. There was a sherry and there was one STR, I think about 15 casks in total. So it was a very, it wasn't sickly sweet. But it was probably on the sweeter end of the spectrum, and it was very velvety.
Is it still available? Probably not.
Actually not.
You're making my mouth water here, and yet I'll have to do with Batch.5, which is lovely. It gets more and more floral every time I have a sip. It's wonderful. It's very well crafted, I must say. Speaking of crafting a whiskey, you have done a lot of research regarding yeast. Is that correct? A lot of Scotland uses a specific strain of yeast. However, you have refused to do so. Why is that?
That's correct. Well, so a lot of the bigger distilleries have over time gravitated towards one or two strains of yeast that were basically specifically developed for malt whiskey distilling that prioritize consistent flavor and high alcohol yields. And that to me sounded a bit boring. So for all of our whiskey, including the one we're drinking today, we use two yeasts. One is a traditional distilling yeast and the other was originally made for wine. So that produces a lot of the kind of fruity flavours and the floral flavours that we're getting. But on top of that, for 6 weeks of the year, we do what we call yeast experiments. And whilst I wouldn't necessarily say it's research because we're not very scientific about it, we basically use our noses and our mouths rather than any kind of equipment. We get lots of different yeasts.
It's trial and error. That sounds like science to me.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We get lots of different yeasts that are made for different things, not for malt whiskey distilling. And we mix them with our existing yeasts and we find out what flavours are produced. And we do them to begin with in small buckets and figure out if they produce alcohol and what they taste like. And then we scale it up to the whole distillery. We've been doing this since 2017. And the first of these yeast trials is going to show its face to the world in April.
Exciting. When is it coming out exactly? When in April?
In the UK, it will launch on the 22nd of April, which is Earth Day.
After Easter.
Exactly when it will launch in the Netherlands. It will be around that time, but it might not be exactly the same day.
And what will it be called?
It will be called Huntress.
Huntress?
Huntress, which is a nod to Nishni. She was a huntress, but also is meant to signify our kind of search for interesting flavors.
Oh, I'm very excited. I wonder what it will taste like. All right, back to your big mission, NC'nean's big mission. You have been certified as a net zero carbon emissions company by Environmental Strategies Limited. What do you do to achieve that? That's a lot of recycling.
It's a lot of recycling. So we are net zero for what's called scopes 1 and 2, or our own operations. So that means what we do at the distillery. And the main part of that is really our energy consumption. And we use renewable energy for everything on site. So we have a very large steam biomass boiler, which creates all of the heat for all of our distilling and mashing, and also heats the offices and things like that.
Is that fueled with what exactly? Biomass?
Wood.
So you just go into the forest and get all your twigs and everything that falls on the ground?
No, we actually use whole trees and then replant them. It is a long cycle renewable process, but we have to replant everything that we fell. And part of the reason we chose it is because we have a commercial forest right next to the distillery. The distillery is in the middle of nowhere. And I always say, with regards to sustainability, each company has to do what makes sense for them. There's no point in putting a biomass boiler on Isla where there are no trees. Yeah. There is no point in us trying to use any kind of renewable energy where stuff has to be brought in from a long way away, because we're so remote that the transport would outweigh any of the benefits. So we chose biomass because it's what we had there. We harvest timber, it dries in the forest, we chip it ourselves, we put it into the boiler as chip, and it produces all the steam that we need for the distillery.
So that keeps you warm, that fuels your machines, your
Exactly.
Then...
Water comes from a spring above the distillery. It doesn't have a name, sadly. So that is what we use to actually make the whiskey. To cool the whiskey, we are not on a river, as most Scotch distilleries traditionally are. So we decided to dig a giant pond, and we just continually recycle the water through the pond as our cooling water. So it is a nice closed loop system, and it cools down naturally without the need for any energy. It just any heat evaporates. So,
and is that then just rainwater that came?
Yeah, topped up with rainwater. It's actually fed by, we warehouse on site, and the warehouses happen to sit above the pond, and all of the gutters from the warehouses feed down into the pond as well. So it's cooled down by kind of natural means, and it works really well.
All right, but the water from the spring, is that drinkable? Or do you still have to process it?
The water from the spring is perfectly drinkable. Per the regulations, you have to UV filter it and things, but
you're not adding anything.
No, just as it is. And actually the water that we put into the mashing is not even UV filtered, because obviously it's going to be distilled twice, which is quite a lot more effective at getting rid of anything than a small UV filter. But anything that we use for bottling, for example, has to go through the UV filter.
Does that influence the taste of the whiskey?
Honestly, no. I don't think it does. I think the importance of water is something that's probably overrated in Scotch mythology, and the importance of yeast, which is actually really important in flavour, is never mentioned. So I'm on a little bit of a mission to talk less about water and talk more about yeast.
All right. I'm sorry we spent so much time on water then.
No.
Let's talk about fungi. And then I also read something about the cleaning products that you use. So everything from top to bottom, from starting the whiskey, from the water, from the energy, from the fuel, to your cleaning products is organic and reusable and biodegradable if it needs to be broken down at all.
Well, this is a really good example of one of the things that I didn't think through. So when I started the distillery, we had the big things in place. We had the organic barley in place, we had the renewable energy, we had the closed loop water system. But I hadn't really thought about cleaning products, because who does? It's not the most important thing when you think about whiskey. But every distillery and many breweries use caustic soda to clean, and that is a chemical. It takes a lot of energy to make it, but it also, at our scale, comes in drums, and those drums are not recyclable because they've had this very highly alkaline solution in them, and it's also not great for the team to work with. Anyway, we started off using it because we didn't have any other option, and then over time we trialed this product called NC'nean, which is an enzyme. It did not work well enough in the mash tun, so I'll come back to that, but we now use it to clean our wash still. So we managed to immediately halve our chemical production by introducing that. But not only did we halve our chemical production, we also made it much better for our team, because they weren't having to work so much with caustic soda. So it was like a win-win-win. The remaining use of caustic soda we have not managed to get rid of, which is very frustrating, and we've got an ongoing project trial other products because the NZ brew wasn't good enough in the mash tun. But what we have switched to is returnable drums. So we no longer have the problem of the waste of the plastic drums that we can't recycle. So we just send the empty drums back, they get refilled and so on.
That is already a big thing. That's a big step.
Exactly.
And so that way, by doing all these things, you have kept your carbon footprint down. You've made it very small. I have the exact number here on my screen. Would you, I don't know if you know it from the top of your head, but if you would like to say it, I can also tell you.
I would say it's 24 for scope 1 and 340 for scope 3.
I only have the total. It's 25.7 ton of CO2 per year, which is 0.27 kilograms CO2 per liter of pure alcohol, which is apparently, according to your website, but I didn't check, less than a returning flight from London to New York.
That is correct.
So a bottle of whiskey.
So exactly. So I think the 25 tons is our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's what the distillery emits. But then we are effectively responsible for another 240 tons or so from our supply chain. So sustainability for everybody, company and individual, is a journey. And we are on that journey, even if we're a bit further along that journey than some other people. And so we have brought our scope 1 emissions down as far as we can, but we still have a lot of work to do on our scope 3 emissions. So, this bottle is 100% recycled glass. That's 40% lower carbon emissions than normal, but there's still carbon emissions associated with it. So that is our kind of next step, is to try and tackle some of the emissions in our supply chain.
It is a big step, a big process in general to set this all up.
Exactly. Yes. It's a long process. But we're not in a rush. It's fine.
That's a good thing. I mean, I'm sure that you'll get there. So all this sustainability is wonderful, but what is, not most important, but second most important, I guess, is that it actually leads to a very good product. Because if you were to be the most sustainable distillery in the world, which you might be. I don't actually have the graphics on that, but I don't know.
We might be. We haven't done the global benchmarking either.
I have no idea. But, even whatever distillery is the most sustainable distillery in the world, if their whiskey sucks, that's still all sustainability not wasted, obviously, but...
Well, kind of it would be wasted, right? Because what's the point in spending? It still takes energy and effort, and there's always going to be some waste.
Exactly.
So what would be the point? It's got to be good.
Exactly. And fortunately, that's the case for NC'neans. I mean, I personally think it passes the taste test with flying colours.
Excellent. I'm so glad you like it. It's lovely to have an excuse to drink it of an evening as well.
Exactly. And how do you like to drink it? Do you drink your whiskey neat always? Or
I do drink it neat, but not always. My absolute favourite, which I'm on another mission, I've got many missions to tell the world more about, is whiskey and soda.
Whiskey and soda?
Whiskey and soda. It is a very traditional drink. It is not something we have invented. It has been around for a long time, and there we go.
It's almost as though we had this scripted.
Exactly. I love it because it's just plain soda water, so it doesn't overpower the taste of the whiskey, but it makes it longer. It reduces the hit of pure alcohol, which some people find a bit overwhelming. It's refreshing, but it's not sweet. It's not like a gin and tonic where it's quite sweet. It's much more savory than that, and I just think it's an underrated, underdrunk drink. It
tastes just like soda with slight alcoholic background. There's a whole bunch of spicy notes indeed, but I do taste, it's not like lemonade, but it's still kind of floral. It's very nice. God, I like it. And so the ratios are
important. 1 whiskey to 2 soda. If you have 1 whiskey, 2 soda. If you have more soda than that, it kind of drowns the whiskey a bit, and then it tastes just like weird soda. So you've got to let the whiskey shine through, but have it diluted enough that it feels long and refreshing.
Do you need to add ice?
Ideally, yeah. Ice, and we love a garnish of mint.
A garnish of mint.
Adds a nice aroma, and it looks pretty.
I hope my favorite bartender is watching this. It tastes wonderful. It's very refreshing, a bit fruitier
Exactly.
as well.
Exactly. Well, I think it can bring out some of the flavours more. Just as people add water to whiskey regularly, it kind of, you get the dilution and the bubbles just add a certain dimension to it, rather than taking away. If you add Coke to whiskey, I think that detracts from the whiskey substantially, but I don't think the soda does, so that's the reason I love it.
And do you think that maybe in the future you will make an expression of NC'nean's that is crafted specifically to blend with soda water or to use in cocktails, for example? Or do you think any expression can be used for that?
Any expression can be used for that. Our core expression, which is what we're drinking tonight, is very specifically meant to be good with soda. And actually the organic barley that we were talking about earlier, which adds that kind of richness to it, means it works particularly well with soda because it stands up to it. It's got that body.
I mean, that's a very satisfying answer because that's the expression that I have right here. So something else we talked about for a little bit already, women in the whiskey industry, in what is from the outside, especially I think viewed as a male-dominated industry. What is it like for you to be a female CEO of a whiskey company, of a distillery?
Well, the funny thing is that from the outside, I think, as you say, people do view it as a very male-dominated industry, which I think is because they perceive that it's only men that drink whiskey.
Exactly, and it's mainly,
it's
mainly old men. Whiskey isn't for young people. Whiskey isn't for women. Those are all the prejudices.
Exactly. But actually, well, A, those things are really no longer true, but B, it's also not true within the industry. There are loads of women that work in the industry. There are other women that run distilleries, but no one seems to have noticed. So I constantly get asked questions like, do you actually like whiskey?
No.
To which my response is, no, I just spent 9 years of my whole life creating something that I think is disgusting.
I just love the environment so much.
Exactly.
That I needed to create another distillery to create this perfectly crafted spirit in order to prove that I can.
Exactly.
God.
But within the industry, no one thinks like that.
There's tons of women.
There's tons of women in the industry. Everyone is super relaxed. No one bats an eyelid if you're female. So it's a very supportive place to be. And I never think about what gender I am.
That's good. I mean, it's a question that I do get from a lot of my girlfriends. They're always very surprised when I mention that I like whiskey, that I can enjoy a good dram. And then usually they say like, oh yeah, I knew that, that Max enjoys whiskey, or I knew that he hosts tastings and everything, but I never expected you to like it. But I mean, neither did I a couple of years ago, but it grows on you.
It does. And I hope that one day we will be in a position where people don't ask those questions.
Me too.
And that people expect women to drink whiskey just as much as they expect men to.
Exactly. So going on expectations a bit and on hopes and dreams, things that you already have achieved with NC'nean. What is your proudest achievement of you personally or of the company?
I think of the company, we are still close enough to having released our first whiskey, which was in September 2020, that is still my proudest achievement. Honestly, when we were building the distillery in 2015 to 2017, having whiskey in a bottle seemed so far away. And the fact that we have managed to make it delicious as well, I'm just really proud of that, and I'm really proud of all of my team without whom I obviously could not have done it. I think together we've started the next phase of NC'nean's journey to get whiskey out there, and I'm really proud of that.
And is there anything for you personally, or is it all the team effort?
I think I'm so bound up in the company that's also like my personal proudest achievement as well. I was actually there when we bottled the first 10 bottles, and it's all bound up in one for me.
All wrapped together. So good. Sorry. I'm just discovering more and more and more flavor to it. There's like a bit of honey coming through now, and there's all these lovely floral tones, and there's strawberries and raspberries, and God, there's so much. I am just, it's really nice to taste how the whiskey develops while you're having sips from it.
Yeah, I think it's important to leave it in the glass for a bit and see what happens. And
have it open up a little bit.
Exactly.
Right. So Annabel, thank you for opening up to us and our audience. And thank you very much for gracing us with your presence, Queen of Spirit. Vond je dit nou een leuke aflevering? Waar kun je ons dan vinden? Max!
Ja, ik ben er ook nog.
Ja, je bent er ook.
Ja, ik heb de hele tijd zitten luisteren aan de achtergrond. En wat super vet. Thank you so much, Annabel, for your time. It was lovely hearing from you guys. Thank you so much.
En waar kunnen mensen ons vinden, Max?
Nou, ze kunnen ons vinden op www.elementsofwhisky.nl/podcast.
En wat voor mooie aanbieding hebben wij daar?
Nou, het is wel superleuk. Als jij nu als een podcast-abonnee je vrienden tipt en zij gaan naar elementsofwhisky.nl/podcast, dan kunnen ze daarbij aanbevolen door, kunnen ze jouw naam opgeven. En dat betekent dat jij €10 cashback krijgt voor elke vriend die jij aandraagt. 10 hele euro's.
10!
Dat betekent al, hoeveel vrienden moet jij uitnodigen om een hele gratis badge te krijgen?
Nou, een batch van 6 whiskies per 6 weken is maar 29,99.
99? Dat betekent dat serieus...
Dus als jij 3 vrienden aanraadt...
Dan heb je een badge gratis en een cent. Hey! Het kan zo makkelijk zijn. Dus ga naar elementsofwhisky.nl/podcast. En laat al je vrienden je aanmelden. En bij aanbevolen door jouw naam neerzetten.
En wil je Annabel en de rest van NC'nean nou vinden op social media? Dan kan dat via @NC'nean.
Zonder de M.
Zonder M.
Alles
Dus geen 3-poot, maar een 2-poot.
Kijk eens aan, dat is duidelijk.
Zo van november.
En dan kunnen jullie ook nog NC'nean volgen. Superleuk. Ontzettend bedankt. Hey, volgende week ben ik wel weer in beeld. Dan zal ik tenminste wel zorgen dat ik...
Very excited. Ja, god, want je ziet er nu niet uit.
Nee, dat klopt. Ik ben heel blij dat je in beeld bent. Dat scheelt. Nou, Annabel, thank you so much for your time.
Have a good night, Annabel.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Slaantje.
Cheers.